Hello everybody, and thank you so much for joining me again for the second instalment of Behind the Paintings with Beth. Hi there, thank you so much for tuning in. Welcome to the second edition. So today we're going to be talking about, drum roll, Claude Monet! I am aiming to talk about Claude Monet's famous water lilies, which is known worldwide. If you've never heard of Claude Monet, now you have. This is a book that I've had for probably about 17 years now. This book has been a great resource in terms of helping me prepare for this video today, and also researching information about Claude Monet and the paintings themselves that we're going to discuss today. So, let's talk art. Point one we are going to make. So his full name is Oscar Claude Monet. Claude Monet was born on the 14th of November in Paris, France in 1840. He was one of the great French Impressionist painters of our time. So fun fact for the day, which I've decided now to add into section 1 of our discussion points. Claude Monet was born into the same decade as such other well-known artists as Paul Cézanne, Edward Degas and Edouard Manet, who all collectively and effectively initiated the Impressionist movement. As Claude Monet, or Monet as many people refer to him as, Monet grew up in Paris on the outskirts. He actually lived near Les Seine, which is obviously the main river that runs through Paris via Notre Dame, etc. So if you were to ever go to Paris, that is the river that you would see. He used to see the Seine merge into the Greater Sea, which ultimately led to inspiring him to paint that very part of where he lived. We know this because he actually goes on to say, he quotes, "The Seine, I've painted it all my life, at all hours of the day, at all times of the year, from Paris to the sea." So the only other person in Monet's life who we believe was actually interested in the arts was his mother. Sadly, Monet lost his mother age 17, which took a real turn of events for him at that age. But at the age of 15, he started to take art lessons. Another fun fact is that he actually began drawing caricatures. And obviously at that age, he hadn't yet discovered his passion for painting yet. So he made a living actually selling well over 100 caricatures and charging pretty high prices for them. He actually quotes, he says, "Should I have carried on, I'd probably be a millionaire by now." That's interesting, isn't it? So, to think that somebody that young in that day and age potentially could well have been a millionaire just from drawing caricatures. So there you go, there's hope. Unfortunately though, out of over the 100 he actually produced, only a handful survived to this very day. So where did Monet's love for water lilies come from? And more so, where did Monet's passion for painting arise from? Well, Monet actually had a really good friend called Eugène Boudin who championed his work. Boudin? Apologies for the pronunciation, guys, I'm really sorry. I'm trying my best. He may well have been the person who planted a seed in Monet's mind which encouraged him to paint from real life. Monet actually goes on to say that his eyes became open because of Boudin's kindness in introducing him to landscape painting. So Monet actually then ventured into the centre of Paris to study painting and the arts full-time. And so forth, Monet then travelled around Europe and other countries in the world to inspire his creativity, eventually landing him in London and then eventually back in France in a little town called Argenteuil. I'm not entirely sure whereabouts that is. Here is where he painted another one of his famous paintings, The Poppy Field. He also painted other poppy fields as well, one of which was in a town called Véthul. He was then starting to get a good name for himself as a landscape artist. The Impressionist style was also coming through during this time. In the example I've just given you of the poppy field, you can see the Impressionist style, which is basically where he's just using tiny little dots of the paintbrush to build up an overall image. So once you take a step back, you can actually make out, when you squint your eyes, the image itself. But it's kind of distorted, and I think that was the idea, was that they were creating a sense of illusion and distortion through the Impressionists. The reason why I'm talking about the poppies is because I believe that this is where his style for the water lilies arose from. This also goes for a lot of the other landscape paintings that he produced as well over his time. If you take a look at the trees and the way he's interpreted and translated the leaves, they really do give that Monet look. So eventually Monet moved to Giverny, as some of you may well know and probably have already visited his house. This is on my bucket list, so I would so love to visit his house in Giverny one day. Giovanni? For any of my friends who speak French properly out there, apologies. Please, please give me a French lesson, someone. So this is where Monet actually lived out the rest of his life, from 1883 up until 1926, where he painted, of course, his beautiful water lily paintings. Like Vincent van Gogh, there are just so many other paintings that I could talk about right now. Potentially I will do some more on the same artist in the future. However, I've decided just to focus on the water lilies. So finally, let's get down to the crunch, shall we? So the water lilies began appearing from 1899 onwards. However, Monet was actually inspired from 1897 to start developing the gardens in Giverny. He actually invested a lot of time and money into revamping his house and redesigning his garden altogether, because in his mind he already had the vision of the water lilies and what he was going to paint. Did you know that the water lilies that Monet actually had in his water pond were actually imported from Japan? His first known painting of the water lilies, as I've mentioned, was produced in 1899, entitled Bridge Over a Pool of Water Lilies. In a lot of his paintings as well of the water lilies, you may well see that he cuts out the sky. He hardly ever paints the sky. This is because he's actually focusing on the reflection in the pond. He wants to focus more on the adjacent imagery being produced, like a butterfly effect almost, of the trees on the land and the lilies in the pond. So it's like the dry land versus the wetlands, but they all have the collective same feel to them, ultimately through the Impressionist style. So some studies I've actually been reading about is that obviously Monet had a lot of willow trees in his garden, and some of those were so intricate and intertwined so much and embedded almost into the pond. Monet was actually trying to create something where you couldn't even tell where the reflection met the other reflection. So as well as the land and the water being separate entities, he was trying to merge them together through the use of his willow trees, which marry both land and water together beautifully. One of his most famous water lily paintings, that is probably, I would say, the most reprinted and sold worldwide, was painted in 1899, called The Water Lily Pond, Harmony in Green. I remember this painting the most probably because I grew up with it. It was hung in our house. Whichever house we lived, it was hung somewhere. The message and meaning behind the water lilies, from what I've read and what I actually think myself, is that Monet ultimately was just trying to capture nature in its truest form. He was expressing himself as an artist in the only way he knew he could, which was just by painting in the way that he loved and using the colours that he identified with the most, that worked well together. I think he just wanted us to appreciate nature and to appreciate the outdoors and to value every single moment we spend, whether it be in our own garden, whether it be on a walk in the countryside or through the woods. I believe he wanted to bring the outdoors to the indoors, so wherever a canvas is hung, whether it be in an art gallery somewhere in the world, whenever you're looking at one of his paintings, you ultimately feel like you're being transported into his garden where he sat himself, painting from what's in front of him, the live object itself. Bodin actually goes on to say, everything that is painted on the spot has a strength, has an intensity, has a vividness that cannot be recreated in a studio. That's how I feel anyway whenever I look at one. There's something so precious about the outdoors. Very much like what we're going through at the moment. Right now, a lot of us are feeling as though we are trapped indoors, or we're sensing a little bit of cabin fever perhaps, or we're feeling overwhelmed by all the information that we're receiving. My suggestion is, why don't you have a good look at some of Monet's water lilies collections, which will help ease your mind and help you calm your spirit and just help you ultimately feel like you're on the outdoors, even though you're on the indoors. In terms of composition, we can safely say he didn't use much negative space. However, he did use the space to the fullest, in the sense that the spaces that he did leave in his paintings were areas of true depth, and his compositions were well balanced. He still filled each corner of that canvas with definition, with detail, with strength of colour that all flourish well together and all intertwine and all mix well in a way that's very harmonic and also very tranquil as well. We've touched on the composition a little bit, but I'd also like to talk about the media he also used. So oil on canvas was Monet's chosen form of media for his water lilies. Let's talk more about the colours as well. He's used vivid pinks, vivid greens, beautiful turquoisey colours, a lot of emerald, almost like my jumper colour. He really has tried to capture nature in all its truest form and all its fullest colours. If you have a back garden, please go out and count as many shades of green as you can find, because I believe that's exactly what Monet did in his back garden. He loved mixing and blending colours. A lot of the colours you can see in his water lilies, he very rarely clashed the colours. I think he chose very warm colours. He chose colours that stood out, which were quite acidic in the sense that they were still colours that worked well together. So the greens and the blues and the pinks, you can see here where he's added tiny amounts of purple as well as white to represent the light hitting the flowers. He hasn't just created a flat canvas of colour, he's also thought about light and dark, he's thought about shade, he's thought about the ways that the leaves in different angles could be darker or lighter, in the sense that he matched them beautifully together. A lot of his water lilies, you could almost say, look like a camouflage painting as well. In terms of depicting depth in his paintings as well, I believe Monet nailed it. If you were to squint at one of his water lilies paintings, you may well make out more definition in the way that he's actually layered the colours, which ultimately create form, hidden form, something that we may well have not seen before had we not taken a deeper and more meaningful, closer look into the painting itself. So by 1914, his water lily series were actually expanding. They were growing bigger physically as well. So they've gone from literally from like a 90 centimetre by 90 centimetre canvas or picture that was framed to a canvas that was 200 by 200 centimetres where a frame was no longer needed. Some of his paintings were actually up to 5 metres wide, which led to him actually having to build a third studio in his garden. Now, one of Monet's most gigantic water lily paintings was entitled The Water Lily Pond with Irises, between 1922 and 1924. So the scale of this actually was 200 centimetres by 600 centimetres. So it was absolutely gigantic. So I mean, this is insane. Come to think of it, I don't actually think it would even fit the width of my flat. It's that big. So in 1986, when Monet passed away on the 6th of December, on the 17th of May, in 1927, to celebrate Monet's long life achievement and his work, the Musée de l'Orangerie des Tuileries, I think I pronounced that right, was opened in Paris. This is where some of his greatest paintings now rest and are on permanent display in an oval form. Again, I haven't actually visited myself. I would love to visit this museum. One day I will, I'm sure, once all of this is blown over. Even though we can't visit there right now, get online and have a look for yourself to see other ways. One way you could access his many paintings just by clicking on Google Images, or maybe just purchasing this book as well. As I say, this book has been fantastic in researching him from other sources as well that I've got. I've also correlated some of the information together for you. Obviously, you know, I'm not an expert. I don't do this professionally either. As I said before, I have an absolute love for this subject, and I really enjoy doing these videos and talking to any of you out there who want to learn all about art and all about the artists of the past. Overall, we can see that Monet did have a decisive influence on all modern art of the 20th century. He truly did inspire the likes of Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko. Monet actually goes on to say, he quotes, "These landscapes of water and reflections have become an obsession." Then he ends the quote with, "I hope something will come of these one day." Well, you know what? Look at the incredible things that you achieved. How amazing is it to know that your paintings hang worldwide and that you achieved such great things with your talent. So hats off to you, Monet. So thank you once again for tuning in and for listening. For any of you who would like to participate in obviously section 5, which is your thoughts. For any of you who would like to leave your comments, what would you like to bring? Have you got any questions? Have you got any information you'd like to add that I may well have missed out? Thank you so much for watching again, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.